June 2003, a remote Irish swamp. Workers clearing the bog stopped dead. Two human hands were sticking straight out of the dark water. Police were called immediately. What they pulled from that dark water was horrifying. Two arms, a chest, a stomach, but no head, no lower body. The skin had turned tough, leathery, completely blackened. Whatever this was, it had been in that bog for a very long time. The body was rushed to a lab. When scientists examined the fingerprints, the fine lines on those preserved hands, they looked only 4 days old. But scientists weren't convinced. They ran radiocarbon dating tests, and when the results came back, everyone in that lab stopped breathing. This body was not 4 days old, not 4 decades, not 4 centuries. This body was 2,400 years old. How does a body survive 2,000 years in a swamp? And who was this person? Tall, powerful, hidden beneath ancient Irish soil. This man played a key role in an ancient Irish kingdom. He was killed, deliberately, and his story, buried for 24 centuries, was about to be told. Welcome back to Histora. This discovery shook all of Ireland, and what you are about to hear, this is only the beginning of the story. Forensic pathologist Richard Shepherd, 20 years of experience examining violent deaths, was brought in to examine this body personally. His verdict was clear. This person did not die naturally. 2,400 years ago, someone made sure this death was brutal. Evidence showed something deliberate. The head removed, the lower body separated, both done purposefully, after death. But this body held more than just cause of death. Hidden within it were clues, extraordinary clues, about life in ancient Ireland. Who was this person? How did parts survive 2,000 years underground? And why? Why was this body left in a swamp? The answers were inside the body itself. A team of experts from multiple fields began the most extraordinary forensic investigation in Irish history. No one knew his real name, so researchers gave him one. They called him Carrigan Man, named after the bog where he was found, near Carrigan Hill, 2,400 years ago. During the Iron Age, Carrigan Hill wasn't just a hill, it was the sacred heart of an ancient Irish kingdom. Ireland was divided into many kingdoms, each with its own territory, its own people, and most importantly, its own king, a king chosen on that sacred hill. Kings were crowned on these sacred hills in ancient ceremonies. If Carrigan Man was connected to this hill, what was his role in this kingdom? The ancient Irish left no written records, no scrolls, no documents, so experts had only one path to the truth: modern forensic science. The ancient Irish left no written records, no scrolls, no documents, so experts had only one path to the truth: modern forensic science. In the Iron Age, the average Irish person stood 5 feet 6 inches. Carrigan Man stood 6 feet 6 inches, a full foot taller than almost everyone around him, towering above his people. Broad-chested, muscular, Carrigan Man would have been an unmistakable and commanding presence in ancient Ireland. A body that big, you might assume a warrior, a laborer, a farmer, but the body itself told a completely different story, one nobody expected. Look closely at his hands. His fingernails were clean, perfectly trimmed, not a single mark of physical labor anywhere on his hands. 2,400 years ago, only the upper class maintained hands like that. Workers and farmers showed their labor in every scar and callus. This man had none. This man had never done manual labor in his life. Those clean, well-kept hands confirmed it clearly. He held a position of very high status in his society. But there was another clue. On his left arm, impression marks in the skin, marks left by something he had been wearing at the time of his death. An armband, multiple layers of expertly crafted leather, decorated with copper alloy clips. Experts confirmed in ancient Ireland, only people of the highest status wore these. This armband was connected to something deeper: sun worship. The copper clips were likely symbols of the sun itself. This man may have held sacred religious power, a religious leader, or a deeply trusted figure within the kingdom. Either way, this man stood at the very top of ancient Irish society. So far, tall, powerful, impeccably groomed, high status, and possibly a religious leader. The picture of Carrigan Man was becoming very clear. But then came the real question: how did this powerful man die? The answer started in the same place his body was found, deep in the heart of an Irish bog. That swamp was no ordinary swamp. A unique mix of decaying plants and cold water created something remarkable: a natural chemical preservation system. The decaying plants made the water highly acidic. That acid essentially tanned the outer skin, turning it tough as leather, sealing everything inside perfectly. Think of Egyptian mummies, preserved, but intentionally, through drying and embalming. Carrigan Man was preserved by nature itself, accidentally, perfectly. This meant every mark on his body, every wound, every cut, every impression made before death was still there, still readable, 24 centuries later. And then, something that stopped the entire team. Both of his elbows had holes, deliberate circular holes driven through the skin, and inside those holes, wood. Experts believe twisted wooden ropes had been tied tightly around his wrists, so tightly that a sharp wooden edge had actually pierced into the flesh of both elbows. These wounds were painful, but not fatal. They were designed to immobilize, to control, to make sure this powerful man could not fight back. Someone needed him restrained. Piece by piece, this 2,400-year-old body was giving up its secrets, but the biggest question still remained. Why was he restrained, and by whom? The answer came from his neck. The pattern of the cut told experts everything. From above at the back, from below at the front, he was on his knees when it happened. This was not a battle death, not an accident. He was kneeling, head bowed, restrained, and then killed from behind. This was a planned, deliberate execution. Investigators concluded, this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't rage. This was organized, formal, a punishment carried out by people who had the authority to carry it out. Investigators concluded, this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't rage. This was organized, formal, a punishment carried out by people who had the authority to carry it out. Why? Was it a personal signature, a calling card left by a killer, or was this something far older, a ritual act with deep symbolic meaning? Nobody had an answer. The nipple wound was the missing link, the piece that could explain everything, if only they could find what it meant. Then, in that same year, in a bog not far away, another body was discovered. Preserved, ancient, remarkably similar to Carrigan Man, found in a marshy area of County Meath. Researchers gave this body a name too. They called him Cloney Caven Man, and his story was about to intersect with Carrigan Man's. Cloney Caven Man had died in the same era. Both bodies showed the same level of preservation. Both were found within a short distance of each other. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Both well preserved, both from the same century, both found close together, and both were missing their lower limbs, separated in exactly the same way. And the most disturbing similarity of all, both bodies were missing their left nipples. Cut away. The same way, the same side, the same hand was behind both deaths. Investigators were now certain one group was responsible for both deaths. But who were these two men? The truth was hidden somewhere in history itself. The answer came from a 5th century manuscript. The writings of St. Patrick, written 900 years after these two men died, contained a crucial passage about ancient Irish kings. Patrick recorded something extraordinary. In the ancient Irish kingdoms, a king's nipples held sacred symbolic power. To remove a king, you cut off his nipples, forever marking him as no longer worthy. Tall stature, groomed hands, a high-status armband, a deliberately cut nipple. Every single clue now pointed to the same extraordinary conclusion. Carrigan Man and Cloney Caven Man were not just high-status individuals. They were kings, ancient kings of Ireland, ruling their kingdoms 2,400 years ago. But knowing who they were raised an even bigger question. Why were two separate kings killed around the same time? Was this ritual, or was something going terribly wrong in the kingdom? The bog itself held the answer. Like a perfectly layered cake, every 12 years, the bog adds 1 centimeter of new material, trapping everything inside. A living time capsule. 1 meter of bog, 1,200 years of history. 2 meters, 2,400 years. At 2 meters deep, that was where the kings were found, exactly where they belonged in time. Experts realized that 2-meter deep layer was a time capsule from 2,400 years ago, and they could open it. They could read what life was like when these kings were alive. Scientists extracted core samples from exactly 2 meters below the bog surface. Then, under powerful microscopes, they began searching for the smallest evidence imaginable: pollen. Every plant and crop produces a unique pollen. Different shapes, different sizes, all identifiable under a microscope. And when they analyzed the ancient layer, the results were sobering. Crop pollen was almost absent. Instead, wild grass pollen dominated the layer. Crops had failed. This was not just a bad harvest. The kingdom was in the grip of a devastating famine. The kingdom was suffering. People were hungry, desperate, cold. And in ancient societies facing catastrophe, they looked to one person for answers: their king. In the ancient world, prosperity and the king were one and the same. If crops grew, the king was blessed. If crops failed, the king had failed. And a failed king could not remain king. And so, the people acted. The king was sacrificed. A new king elected, and cutting the nipples ensured, in their belief, he could never return as king. Not in this life, not in the next. But here is the most human question of all. Did Kerrigan man know what was coming? Did he walk toward his death with knowledge, or was he taken completely by surprise? The answer came from his stomach. Preserved inside that ancient body were traces of his final meal. And what they found was deeply telling. His final meal, simple flour bread and butter. But his fingernail analysis told a different story. For the 4 weeks before death, he had eaten mostly meat, a king's diet. He had been removed from his throne before his death, stripped of his royal privileges, given the food of common people. He knew something had changed. He had to know. Scientists extracted core samples from exactly 2 meters below the bog surface. Then, under powerful microscopes, they began searching for the smallest evidence imaginable. Pollen, Kerrigan man, Cloney Cavan man, 2 kings of ancient Ireland, forgotten by time, hidden beneath a bog, until science gave them back their dignity and their story. When the famine came, their people made an impossible choice. Remove the kings, sacrifice them. Hope, that desperate act of ancient faith, sealed in a bog for 24 centuries. If this story moved you, share it. These ancient kings deserve to be remembered.